Good morning, traders. How are you all doing today? Karibuni sana. Glad you could all join us this fine Thursday morning, although it is a bit chilly here in Nairobi. So everyone is doing well. So for those who are new, my name is Mitch Kaniero, and I'm a trader with Afriforex. I want to welcome you to another Afriforex daily analysis session. And I do know during this session, we as the Afriforex team, we analyze the markets and we identify what trading opportunities we can take in for the day, and we do share that information with you. So remember, feel free to ask any questions or queries on the chat box. The team will be there to respond to you, but I will also be looking to address any questions there on the chat box at the end of this session. So let's jump straight into it. So today is a bit of a weird one. The markets are not necessarily looking the best, or at least ideal for us. Let me just say that, because remember, we do end up showing you what it is we will be looking at taking for the day. Now, I know a number of you have looked at the news. So we had not necessarily that much news yesterday in terms of fundamentals, but we do know that Trump did end up pausing his tariffs for around 90 days, except for China. And that did end up bringing in a lot of volatility on the charts. So we'll end up having a look at that. So as you can see, the markets really did end up gaining a lot of the Dow Jones, at least of the indexes, but we'll have a look at that as well. So with that being said, based on the way the markets are, they were quite fearful before. Our watch list is going to be quite different today. Today, we're not necessarily going to be focusing on any currency pairs, mainly because the markets have been very unpredictable. They were fear-based, based on, as you can clearly see, we have a fear-based market watch list here. Usually when the market is very scared, unsure about what's going to happen, is when Trump did end up bringing in the tariffs. You can see there was a lot of weakness of the Australian dollar, the Canadian dollar, and the New Zealand dollar. Those were pairs that we were looking at selling throughout this whole week. But there was also buying opportunities on the Swiss franc and the Japanese yen, which we did end up seeing a lot of strength on that. However, once the Trump did end up rescinding his tariffs, the markets did end up reacting quite unpredictably. And due to the fact that there were no real fundamentals for us to really focus on, that's the reason why we're not necessarily going to be looking at any currency pairs. Hopefully later on, we will end up getting some fundamentals, because you can see during the London session, there's nothing much happening, just a few speeches, so no real change to our watch list at that point in time. But you can see at least we do have a number of US dollar news. So at least during the US session, we end up expecting some volatility. At that time, hopefully, we'll end up getting a bit more news, and we should end up getting some clear directions for what we're potentially going to be able to do tomorrow or later on today. So for today, our focus will just be on the indices as well as gold and silver. So for the currency pairs, we are just going to be sitting on our hands today. You know, sometimes with trading, it's not that you're meant to be trading every single day. You should know when to trade and when not to trade. That's also one key factor you do need to plan. So we'll end up having a look at the pairs that we did have at least yesterday and see what ended up happening. Because remember, it's always best to review your trades, figure out what happened so you can end up planning for the next day. So before we do end up focusing on today's pairs, luckily we did end up getting a few screenshots that we did manage to get. So we'll showcase that before we end up looking at today's pairs. So we'll start off here with Bravin. Bravin, you know you love trading silver. No surprise here that you did manage to have a buying opportunity on silver. Very nice buy. We can see the price already coming up in your favor. You caught the buy within a buyer's area. Stop loss is already above your entry. So very, very good job on this trade, Bravin. Nothing much really to add, but well done. So also next, we also did get George. Check you have to see a screenshot here. You did manage to grab a selling opportunity on the US dollar against Canadian dollar. I know it might be not necessarily very clear for a number of you, but you can be able to see a sell was right there, where it did manage to end up grabbing the sell once the price broke that particular area. And you can see he took his take profit where the buyers are, at least, even though the price did end up continue going to the downside. Remember, you are not necessarily going to retire off this trade, even if you just got that extra amount of pips. Remember, the main objective in trading is being in and being out, making sure you're able to take profit each and every day. So still very well done on this trade, George Chege. So also next, you also didn't manage to grab a selling opportunity on the euro against the British pound. Similar situation, you can see your sell right there within an area where there are sellers. I guess that was after the probe. And you can see you did take your profit within the buyer's area, where it's in and out. No issues there, where it does not necessarily give you much stress. So I know sometimes you end up entering a trade in positive, sometimes positive, sometimes negative, and sometimes could end up giving you a headache where you decide to close the trade without letting it actually play out. So such a trade is very well done because they do not end up giving you that headache. So still very, very good job on this trade, George Tege. So also next we get Stacy. Stacy, I'm sorry I did not see your screenshot yesterday, but this you did end up managing to send a very, very nice selling opportunity on gold right at the extreme area where the sellers were. You can see the price really did come down very well in your favor. And you can see your stop loss is way below your entry. So this is a very, very good trade. You do end up hoping you made some good money on that trade, Stacy, but still keep up the good work that you're doing. So remember, guys, if you do want to take any setups based on things that we do share here, feel free to send them in to us. Our contact details are in the video description below. So let's focus on the pairs that we had yesterday. Let's look at a quick review before we end up having a look at the indices. So here on the US dollar against Swiss franc, yesterday we were looking for selling opportunities. You can see the 3 areas that we had pointed out, and there was a small sell that did end up working out. You can clearly see later on, once the price at 11 o'clock did end up reacting within this small seller's area, we got the price coming to the downside, and there was a small hold below. And you can see there was a small selling opportunity, but it's a similar situation, making sure you target within an area where there are buyers, because you can clearly see the price was not actually able to break that level to the downside. You can see later on, this was around 8 o'clock or so. That's when Trump did end up announcing that the tariffs were not necessarily coming into effect for the next 90 days. And you can see the reaction that did come in. This has something to do with some Swiss franc weakness, because remember the Swiss franc was strong. However, since there are no fundamentals that have actually told us the Swiss franc is strong, there's nothing necessarily we're going to be doing on this kind of stuff. So hope that's clear, at least learning from that. And it's a similar story on most of these other currency pairs. You can see here on the Australian dollar against Swiss franc, the trades did work out during the London session. You can see we got a pullback right within there. Right, just missing our area right there, but we can see the market did manage to continue coming to the downside, and it only stopped rather than at the bottom there. But remember, we keep on mentioning these market opening timing. So that's 9, 10, 3, and 4:30. If you do make sure you're managing your trades at that time, then you will end up being safe on your trades. At least you can be able to make sure you exit within good timing. So as you can see, if you did end up taking this trade during the London session at 3, once the US market did open, that's when you can see the price did start to turn. It was fully at 8 o'clock. That's when the prices really did take off to the upside. So similar situation here on the Australian dollar against Swiss franc. Unfortunately, it's not a pair we're going to be looking. Now, here we have the New Zealand dollar against Swiss franc. Similar story where our bias here was to look for selling opportunities. But the fact that everyone was looking to sell the New Zealand dollar, because remember, in the fear-based market, people are looking for selling on the New Zealand dollar and looking to buy the Swiss franc. Now, the fact that it's no longer fear-based, you can clearly see the huge reaction that did end up coming in where these prices are going to the upside. So you could potentially end up looking for a trading opportunity here, but for us, it wouldn't necessarily be the safest thing for us to do. Because one thing we're realizing is could potentially be pulling back, attempting to pull back within one of these support and resistance areas, especially on the larger time frame. But we'll end up having a look at some of them which have just pulled back within support and resistance areas that you could end up finding the markets actually continuing to go to the downside. So here we have the Canadian dollar against Swiss franc. You can see the same correlation. During the London session at 11, we were within a small area where there are sellers, but the sells did end up coming to the downside. But at 3 o'clock during the US market open, or even at 4:30, you can see the price was back within the buyer's area. And that's when the market did end up reacting. But you can clearly see at 8 p.m., that's when the news did end up coming out. And this move to the upside was mainly because of Trump. So unfortunately, we do not necessarily know what he's going to do. And that's the reason why we're not necessarily going to be looking at any currency pairs today. So here on the British pound against Swiss franc, it seems that all the Swiss franc pairs was a similar story, where during the London session, the market started coming to the downside. But you can see on this British pound against Swiss franc, we did not want to jump in on selling opportunities until we either breach this area to the downside, which you can see we did. When the market did manage to come to the downside here, you can see we got confirmation that the price was holding below. And at that point in time, we could have actually looked for a selling opportunity during the London session. But it's a similar story. At around 3 o'clock, the price was back within this particular area. And similar story at 8 p.m., that's when the market did end up taking off to the upside. So similar story where one meant to look for those selling opportunities. The sells did work during the London session, but unfortunately, during the US session, things did end up switching. So like right here, we have the US dollar against the Japanese yen. Here, our bias is meant to be looking for selling opportunities yesterday. And you can see the sells did work out during the London session only, because you can see we wanted to see whether or not we could get this price reaching and holding below. So you can see the first attempt, the price came to the upside, but on the next attempt, when the price came down, you see the price didn't manage to actually give us confirmation. It was holding below and didn't manage to continue going down until 3 p.m. during the US market. You can see that's when the prices did start turning to the upside. The similar story, unfortunately for us, on the US dollar against the Japanese yen. It's not necessarily going to be a pair we're going to be looking at. Plus, the reason why we're not necessarily going to be, let's say, switching our bias and just start jumping in on buying opportunities. You can see here on the US dollar against the Japanese yen, this price did manage to come down within this particular area. You can see we're back just within a small support and resistance area. This price could still just be pulling back within here before actually continuing to go to the downside. So remember, most people are incited due to the fact that there was a lot of fear in the markets. Everyone is thinking that the markets are going to crash, we're in a recession and everything is going to go down. So all those people, at least majority of people, were only looking to sell these pairs. So the fact that the prices have come up quite aggressively, definitely this has incited very many people to look for buying opportunities. But we're not necessarily going to just quickly jump onto the buys, and that's the reason why we're not necessarily going to be looking at any pairs to take. Remember, it's always better safe than sorry in terms of when you're trading and managing your market, or at least managing your money. Sometimes knowing when not to trade does end up saving your account. So it's a similar story here on the Australian dollar against the yen. Our bias here was to look for selling opportunities. You can see the trades did work out during the London session, where the price was within the area where the sellers. There's a similar story at 3 o'clock. The price managed to come down, unfortunately not towards the main buyer's area. But you can see from 3, that's when the prices did end up starting to turn to the upside. And it's a similar story at 8 p.m. where the prices did continue going up higher. But you can clearly see if I end up going to the higher time frame here on the Australian dollar against the Japanese yen, you can see we are just pulling back within this small support and resistance area. So don't be surprised that the price could even just pull back here. Definitely, so many people right now are looking at the buys and you could find the prices coming down. And that for that uncertainty, that's the reason why we're not necessarily looking at these currency pairs today. So the next yen pair we did have, and we can clearly see due to the fact that the yen pairs are very much correlated. We have the New Zealand dollar against the Japanese yen. But in this pair, the market was just ranging throughout the whole time during the Asian session, the London session, a bit during the US session. But you can see at 8 p.m., the price did end up going to the upside. So unfortunately for us in this kind of pair, there was no real selling opportunity. Similar situation here with the Canadian dollar against the Japanese yen, since we were meant to be looking for those selling opportunities. But you can clearly see the market was just ranging unless you were looking for a trading opportunity or at least a selling opportunity at the top of the range, only looking to end up exiting at the bottom. If that was the case, there could have been some potential trading opportunities here, but you can see at 8 p.m. where the prices did end up really going to the upside. But it's a similar story. Remember, when we end up going up to a higher time frame, even here on the daily, we are within a small range. So you could easily find this market reacting, coming to the downside. So you can clearly see the same correlation coming in with all these yen pairs. So right here, even on the British pound against the Japanese yen, at least this pair did work out quite well for us yesterday. Remember, our bias here was to look for selling opportunities, and you can see the pairs that we had pointed out. Initially, we were not necessarily too convinced that the price had actually breached this area to the downside, but did mention if we did get the price breaching down here, then we would be making sure to manage our trade within this next price. And you can see the trade did work out very nicely during the London session, although this was around midday, where the price managed to come all the way down towards the main buyer's area right there. And you can see at 3 p.m., once the US market opened, the fact that we're within an area where there are buyers, it's not a good place to look for any selling opportunities. And you can see the buyers did end up reacting very, very aggressively. But similar story, unfortunately for us today, we're not going to be looking at that currency pair. So the next pair we did have was the euro against the US dollar. And you can see the same story where the London session worked out quite well. During the US session, things end up turned, or at least things turned around quite aggressively. So you can see here on the euro against the US dollar, where our bias here was meant to be looking for buying opportunities. You can see the price was within this area when we're discussing the market. Wanted to see the price coming down and showing us confirmation to holding above. You can see that's exactly what happened as soon after. When the price came down lower, you can see it never held below. It came straight back up and was holding to the upside. So there were potential buying opportunities there. But you can see, even though we're trying to target all the way at the top, clearly these sellers did end up giving issues based on the fact that they reacted from there before. You can clearly see they reacted within that area again. And if you do note the time, that was at around 3 p.m. where the price was within that seller's area. And that's when the prices did start coming to the downside. So even though the price is still holding within this buyer's area, and we could potentially see the price attempting to come to the upside, Unfortunately for us, since it's a pair that has a lot of uncertainty, we're not going to be looking at that today. So similar story here on the euro against the Australian dollar. I mean, this kind of pair yesterday, buyers to look for buying opportunities but not really work out because you can't clearly see we're within an area where the sellers want to see a pullback coming back in within this buyer's area. And you can see the price did end up struggling here quite a bit. Can't even clearly see its attempt to go to the upside, but it ended up entering some sort of small range, just bouncing between these levels. It's a similar story at 8 p.m. That's when around the price did manage to continue going to the downside. So a lot of pairs do not necessarily give us that many opportunities, as you can clearly see the reaction that's actually happening on these kinds of pairs. But you can see here on the euro against the New Zealand dollar, similar story with the euro against the Australian dollar, where we were meant to look for buying opportunities. The price did end up holding within the buyer's area, but you can clearly see Trump had other ideas where the market did end up coming to the downside. So the stories are pretty much similar for the rest of the currency pairs. Here on the euro against Canadian dollar, the same correlation where the price did end up reacting within the buyer's area. We entered some sort of small range before the markets did end up coming to the downside, completely falling off our watch list. So that's it for the currency pairs, because you can clearly see the trades did work, or at least attempt to work out during the London session. But it was only later on where the prices did come down very, very aggressive. But that being the case, since at least it's always good to end up looking at the pairs, at least to figure out what happened, how you can end up seeing whether or not trades work out during the London session or the US session, or at least the importance of knowing which session you're actually trading. If you're entering a trade, are you relying on the big boys during the London session to push it, or are you relying on the big boys during the US session to push it? Because remember, there are two different big boys, someone in the US, or at least there are rich people in the US and there are rich people in Europe. So they will end up doing different things regardless of whether or not they both have money. So you'll find that during the London session, they'll be interested in buying, but you can clearly see during the US session, they were more interested in selling. But this is something that keeps on at least adjusting based on the fact that the unpredictability of Trump at the moment. So let's just focus on the pairs that we're going to be looking at, which are the indices as well as gold and silver. So as you can see, yesterday we had the indices all on the sell side, or at least all these pairs. But I think you've noticed a number of them have moved to the buy side. So you can see gold, the Dow Jones, and the Nasdaq are all on the buy, but we still have silver on the sell. Because remember, with these four pairs, we always mentioned were purely technical. So it does not necessarily matter what news event is coming out. We are following the charts in terms of certain levels need to be broken in order to determine what direction we're going to be looking. So we come here to the NAS 100. Yesterday, since our bias was to look for selling opportunities, you can see the areas that we did have to look for our potential sells. Now, the sells did work out at least a bit during the London session, where the price attempted to come to the downside. A similar story at 3 p.m., the price was within a small buyer's area. And you can see that's when the prices did start reacting. And you can even see later on, the price did manage to break this area to the upside, showed us confirmation it was holding above. You can clearly see it did end up taking off quite aggressively. But remember, as long as we're holding above, below the red support and resistance area where the price was, because remember, we did end up having our level right there. As soon as it broke that level, our bias did switch, and we will now start looking for buying opportunities. So our areas of interest for our buys will be within these three areas. So this red SNR is now our line in the sun, meaning as long as we're holding above that particular area right here, we will be looking for buying opportunities. So we will focus on these three kinds, or at least these three areas. We'll wait to see what ends up happening. Ideally, what we would want to see is a pullback within this support and resistance area that was broken. It was a major seller's area. Hopefully, we can end up getting some pullback coming in within that area before we're able to look for buying opportunities. But be aware that the price can still come down all the way down here within the red SNR, and we could still find our buying opportunities, especially when you go up to a higher time frame. There is potential that the prices can pull back within these certain areas. So do be careful about that. You can see the buyers came up quite aggressively, but we are also back within some sort of small support and resistance area. I think this was based on the daily time frame. You can clearly see the way the markets did end up coming to the downside. Everyone at this point in time was looking for selling opportunities. But right now, if you did end up wanting to sell, you can clearly see that the prices come back within that support and resistance area. So there is potential that this market could actually attempt to come down lower. And that's the reason why we did mention that the price can still come back within this buyer's area, and we will still be looking for buying opportunities then. So hope that is clear on the NASDAQ as we move on to the next indices that we do have, which is the Dow Jones. Now, yesterday, our bias here was to look for selling opportunities. You can see the areas that we had pointed out. During the London session, we did end up getting a small sell coming in. You can clearly see the price came all the way down, back within the buyer's area at 3 p.m. And after that, you can clearly see the US big boys did end up starting to push to the upside. I guess the rumors were starting to build. And I guess that once it did end up getting confirmed, you can clearly see the way the price did manage to go to the upside. It's a similar story. Once it did end up breaking this area to the upside and holding above, our bias did switch, and we will now be looking for buying opportunities. So our focus will be on these three areas to look for potential buying opportunities. Hopefully, we can end up getting this pullback coming in, because that would be the ideal situation. Hopefully, within this support and resistance area, for us to potentially look for some buying opportunities here. But now remember, the price can still manage to continue going to the upside. Remember, if we are able to break this area to the upside and we do end up getting a pullback, it's a similar story. We can be able to look for buying opportunities within this support and resistance area. So in this situation, we'll wait to see what happens. You can see the markets are a bit slow right now. We'll wait to see once the London market does open, what they will be interested in doing in these charts. So hope that is clear in the Dow Jones as we move on to silver. Now on silver, our bias here is still to look for selling opportunities. You can see the areas that we had pointed out. And the main reason for that, I think if I do end up going up to a higher time frame, the 1 hour time frame, you will be able to see that this main seller right here is the main seller that we are focusing on, because this is the main seller that didn't manage to push this price all the way down within here. You can see it made this low. This was just a probe, and it confirmed that it was just a probe based on the fact that the price came back within that area. But we know that once the price gave us a pullback, and this price was not good enough to actually come down lower, did mention that the price could end up looking for a better price. And we know as long as we're holding below this area, our bias is to look for selling opportunities. Remember, if the price is able to break and hold above that area, that's when we will actually start looking for buying opportunities. But for right now, we pretty much have the exact same levels that we did have, because the story is still the same. Even though the prices did manage to continue going to the upside yesterday, our bias here is still going to be looking for sells. So our main objective is to wait and see at what point in time the big boy sellers will actually come back in. One key thing, or at least one trick you could end up using, it's something that we do end up teaching as well. You can be able to follow the story of the buyer and the seller. You can see if you're looking for a selling opportunity as the price is going up, follow where the buyer is pushing up from. The buyer is pushing up from there. You can clearly see he kept on pushing within that area. If you want to be safe, wait for the breach and a hold below such an area to look for your selling opportunities. But you can clearly see, even though the sellers came down aggressive, this buyer's area kept on holding. So you can be able to follow such a story. So as long as the price is continuing to go up, you can keep on following where the buyers are, and you'll realize, or at least you can be able to wait for the point in time when the price is able to actually break that area to the downside. And if you do see the price holding below, then you can be able to look for your selling opportunities. That's one at least small trick you could end up using to at least enable your entries to be at least a bit safer, rather than trying to anticipate the market or just entering within an area where the sellers. So situations like this could have easily stopped people out, especially once someone sees the probe right there, waiting for a pullback. There could have been a potential selling opportunity, but these buyers kept on giving those issues. So as long as the buyers are in control, let's wait to see at what point in time they'll struggle. We wait to see whether or not big boy sellers are actually going to come back in. But remember, if the price breaks and holds above the red SNR, we will switch our bias and we will start looking for buying opportunities on silver. So last but not least, we do have gold. Now on gold, our bias yesterday was to look for selling opportunities. But you can see the three areas that we had pointed out to look for sell. We did mention that we did get the price breaking and holding above the red SNR right there, we would be able to look for buying opportunities. Now you can see the market. We're even doing the same thing where we're following the story of the buyer. Buyer kept on pushing to the upside. You can see the buyer pushed within here, even though the market did end up probing, and this was at 3 p.m., which is the US market open. That could have been a good sign to look for selling opportunities, but the fact that the buyer kept on holding to the upside, there was no trading opportunity then. But you can see later on, once the price broke to the upside within that area, that did confirm that our level has been reached, especially once the price did end up coming back within that area and confirming that the price is actually holding above. As soon as you did see that, could have actually started looking for buying opportunities then to take the price up higher. But if similar story, if I just do a small example of how I did mentioning, if you're following the story, let's say, for example, as I'm mentioning how you're following the story of how the buyers are coming in, if let's say you're seeing the sellers coming down, you can be able to do the same thing with the sell. So once the seller pushed within that area, seeing they came down, there was a pullback, The next seller pushed within this particular area, trying to come down. But once it was broken to the upside, you can clearly see the price did still manage to come back within that area, and you could have looked for your entry opportunity at that point in time. And you can see those ones will end up giving you less issues in terms of looking for your trading opportunities. So those are small tricks that you can end up using. But remember, if you do want more education, feel free to join us or at least sign up for the AMP class. There should be a link in the video description, but I will ask John to see if he can put it in the chat box. But if not, you can be able to go to afriforex.com and the academy section, and you should be able to find that information there. So I guess we will wait to see. So today, the buyers will be looking for buying opportunities here. Let's wait to see within these particular areas. Once the price is reach and hold above, the buyers will look for the buys. So right now, since the price is all the way up there, remember the main thing we would want to see is a potential pullback coming in. So hopefully we can end up seeing the price coming down within this particular support and resistance area. We could potentially look for some buying opportunities there. Remember, at least if this market is continuing to go to the upside, those are the levels we'll be focusing on. But remember, as long as the price is holding above this red SNR, our bias is to look for buying opportunities. If by any chance the price comes down, breaks and holds below the red SNR, then remember our bias will switch and we will start looking for selling opportunities there. So hope that is clear, not necessarily that much in terms of what the pairs that we're going to be looking at. But remember, not every day is a trading day. So do end up making sure at least learning from that as well. Today could also be a day you end up practicing. So I'm seeing here on the chat box, I'm seeing Lyle. Lyle, happy to see you here. You're saying you can thank bond vigilantes for the rallies in the markets yesterday. They shorted US treasuries, push yields up while keeping the dollar low, forcing Trump to reconsider his stance on tariffs. Yeah, clearly, yeah. It clearly seems that that was the case. You did end up mentioning that yesterday as well. You did mention that the government was probably going to do something and we will end up seeing a small rally. So that's very interesting on that, Lyle. We'll definitely need to link up and have a quick chat at least on what else you think about this. But definitely that is us today. Our focus is just going to be on these four pairs and we'll see what ends up happening, right? But thanks, Lyle, for the comment. At least, yeah, that's good to know. I do not necessarily know that. So once again, I want to thank you guys so much for joining me today. Hope you have found value in this session. I know that not necessarily that many pairs to trade today. You can still be able to trade currency pairs if you do want. Ideally, remember, we just show you what we will be looking at doing for the day. So if we're not necessarily going to be looking at trading currencies, we can't come and tell you buy this and sell this if we're not necessarily going to be doing the same thing. So once again, thank you guys so much. Hope you have an amazing trading day. God bless, happy trading, and bye for now. Cheers, guys.